Welcome to week 2 of Business 365 Creativity and Innovation. Today we will cover briefly innovation ecosystem and inspirational innovation. Again, the book is Closing the Innovation Gap by Judy Estrin. You want to be sure to have purchased the book by this time in the class. Reminder on why all of this is important. As Peter Drucker said, the famous business consultant, Harvard professor, business has only 2 functions, marketing and innovation. Real quick review. In week 1, we discussed the important role in the innovation process of the core values of an organization. Questioning, patience, trust, openness, and a willingness to take risks. This is the first slide of chapter 2 in the text. The graphic shows the innovation ecosystem and provides an overview of what is covered in Chapter 2. Essentially, the important roles in an organization or between organizations in the innovation process are research, finding out basic principles, development, working out what those principles might look like when put in the form of an actionable innovation, and then application, which is the user determining how that innovation can add value and enrich lives. All of this takes place within a sphere of funding and leadership and culture and education and policy, and these apply to society and to the organizations and companies and government groups within society. A really great example of the relationship between research and development and application is provided in the way that basic science led from the discovery of the electron to the development of the transistor radio and the computer and on and on and on in a very brief time. The electron was only discovered by J.J. Thomson in 1897. A mere 30 years later, the transistor was conceived by Julius Lilienfeld. So from the discovery of the electron to the idea that you could use a semiconductor and create a transistor, it took 30 years. It took 17 more years for John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley to invent the transistor in 1947, right after the end of World War II. The integrated circuit, the imprinting on silicon or germanium of multiple transistors happened a decade later. And in very, very short order, the transistor was applied in the radio, then the computer, and so on and so forth. So this provides you a really good idea of research, basically figuring things out, development, coming up with bits and things, and then application. How do you take the development and put it in a form where the innovation can add value and enrich lives? Incidentally, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded for the development of the transistor in 1956. Chapter 3 talks about inspirational innovation. And there's a lot of concepts in this chapter, and it's covered kind of quickly. One of the things I'd like to warn you about is that, well, Ashford is really pursuing a political objective in the book. He's going to make arguments about what society should be doing and what's wrong with business and so on and so forth. Those are interesting. Those are not what we are interested in this class. What we are interested in this class is the process of innovation and creativity, how you can apply these, and how these can be encouraged or discouraged within a business. Because that's really what we're concerned about in Business 365. The business of 365 is innovation and creativity in business. Long-term corporate investment has historically been very important in basic research in this country. As Ashford points out, some major regulated monopolies were responsible for a lot of the early investment. Because if you're a monopoly, your customers don't have a lot of choice where they're going to go. They pay you what you charge, and you have money to burn. Thus, AT&T, Bell Labs, a phenomenally successful source of creativity, innovation, and basic research. It was through Bell Labs that the microwave background in the universe was discovered, and basically laid the foundation for modern radio telescopes and much else. RCA Sarnoff Labs, IBM Research, these last two are not regulated monopolies, but they were essentially monopolies in the early days of their industry through patents and other protection, and Xerox PARC, very important sources of basic research. Obviously, competition has come to those. I want to circle back and look at how some of the concepts in Chapter 3, Inspirational Innovation, tie back to what we read in Chapter 2 about the innovation ecosystem. Because there's some really important concepts in here that apply to understanding how innovation and creativity may be encouraged in organizations, and the way these things take place. You'll recall that the innovation ecosystem was this process that flowed from research through development to application, and it took place within this environment of funding and leadership and culture and education and policy. And the section on inspirational leadership takes a look at some of the key things that one wants to consider regarding innovation, and you can circle back and understand these within the construct of the innovation ecosystem. So one of the things that's discussed is radical versus incremental impact. Some organizations are, okay, let's massage this, massage that, let's make minor changes. Others, and examples are provided, look for disruptive technologies. Steve Jobs, I want to put a ding in the universe. He didn't say, I want to incrementally deform the universe. I want to put a ding in the universe. Radical change. This is a function of culture within an organization. Influential individuals. This is where leadership can be manifested. And a couple key individuals are discussed in the book. Vannevar Bush, who was the chief of the Office of Scientific Research and Development during the war years, and helped launch the Manhattan Project and a lot of basic research. And J.C.R. Licklider of the Information Processing Techniques Office, and he was responsible for a lot of the thought that went into data processing, a lot of the thought that went into the innovation of the foundations of of modern data tech processing and the internet. So culture can be critically important. What's the orientation of your organization? Small changes, big changes. Do you have influential individuals, folks who are leaders, who encourage innovation? I worked for a gentleman by the name of Gurminder Bedi, and I discussed him in the first lecture. And Gurminder was all about thinking outside of the box, change. If you went to him with an idea, he would say, he basically cut you off and say, what do you want? It wasn't, well, we can't do that, or that wasn't invented here. It was, what do you want? And he'd let you take it and run with it. It's got to tell you, that is not the usual case in large organizations like Ford Motor Company. And then there's this discussion in Ashford's book about work versus funding request. And you can see here where he's starting to think about, she's starting to think about the political arguments that she's going to make. Some organizations, research organizations, corporate organizations, put a great deal of emphasis on, okay, how do I know that you've got the right idea? How do I know I should work on your idea rather than someone else's idea? And a great deal of effort is put into funding requests. Academia or nonprofit organization put together grant requests. You may be familiar with that. If you're in a corporation, you put together requests for budget, you put together requests for expenses, you put together requests for capital funding, and these all get balanced. And these all take away from the limited resources available in your organization, particularly your limited creative resources to get work done. And in the early days of research in the organizations of Vannevar Bush and J.C.R. Licklider, these organizations weren't about prioritization. They had lots of money because, again, these are from RCA and AT&T and IBM. It was go off and do great work. Resources become more constrained in organizations in a competitive environment. They can become more restrained when the economies are tough, and there becomes this tough balance between funding requests and getting work done. And finally, there's the issue of academic and industry partnerships. These can be tremendously important. Estrin discusses Silicon Valley and how academics moved into business, and then they moved out of business, and they moved into another business, and out of all this you have Intel and some of the other major startups in Silicon Valley. And this is because you have this flow from academic research into industry entrepreneurship. And this is where education comes in. And again, we're looking at the innovation ecosystem. Culture, leadership, funding, policy, education. Today, this is very important because, and this is an opportunity for you and for other business folks, educational institutions have a library of patents. Most often, the patents for work performed in an educational institution are held by that university or college. So, for instance, I've had conversations with professors at Michigan State University, and there's a tremendous inventory of patents. Sometimes professors make agreements to buy those from the university at very low costs. Sometimes entrepreneurs go and they scan that inventory of innovations for something that they might apply. It's an opportunity, and it demonstrates the role of education as a key element of the innovation ecosystem. Finally, there are a few thoughts to ponder. One really interesting observation was that the transistor was announced by the New York Times in 1948 on page 46. The great innovations, the great actions of creativity don't show up on page 1. They're buried in the back. You often don't know it at the time. Only people of great vision can find those. There was an observation, a paraphrase in the text that I found interesting, and it reminded me of Scoop Nisker's remark on KFOG, which is a radio station out of San Francisco that some of you might be familiar with. If you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. I had a roommate in college from San Francisco. I thought that was spot on. You can kind of mash that up with Niels Bohr's remark that prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. It's not just Yogi Berra that made incredibly prescient, incredibly obvious, incredibly nonsensical kind of remarks. Niels Bohr is the guy who probably Albert Einstein would point at as being the finest physicist of the 20th century. This guy's the top of the field. Prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. Bottom line, though, Adam Key, remarked upon by Judy Estrin in the text, the best remark is, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So if you don't like the future, go out and make some of your own. That's all for thoughts for week 2. But I need to make one quick remark about the writing assignment before I let you go. The assignment for week 2 is research and explain how the U.S. government supports innovative technology activities in companies. You want to discuss at least 2 government-sponsored programs, explain the positive effects these programs have on technology innovation in the private sector, and explain if innovation would still occur if the government did not sponsor technology and innovation. So your paper is going to want to have at least 4 paragraphs, one for each of these. And you want to be thoughtful, thorough, complete, and detailed in your response. Be careful as you think through this. Keep in mind that NASA built the International Space Station with the help of the Russians and the European Space Agency, but that the founders of Amazon and PayPal are servicing it. The end-all and be-all is very definitely not government, but it may play an important role. Make sure you've got good examples and you think it all through. And you must relate your essay to the readings from chapters 1 to 3. I will be grading you upon this. You can't just wing it based upon the assignment. You must tie back your thought process to things like the innovation ecosystem. With that, I look forward to reading your work for week 2. Be sure to email if you have any questions. Have a great week. Bye-bye.